Okay, so in the month of November, I'm having conversations with men in kind of the lead up to International Men's Day, because it turns out there is one on November 19th. And I did this in the spring with women, where I talked to different women about, International Women's Day and what was going on for women in the world. And I thought, let's do this for men in November. And so today I'm talking to Billy. Billy and I worked together at Providence with Dig back in the day. And I thought he might have an interesting perspective. So, Billy, why don't I let you introduce yourself and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Yep, my name's Billy Jackson. I worked at Providence for a long time. That's my work stuff. And then I joined a startup, learned everything I knew about product from Leah. Almost everything. Very
Not
close.
everything.
Yeah, close though, close. I've been in healthcare IT, but growing up though, interesting life. My dad was a Boilermaker welder, so we moved like 13 times in 7 years.
Yeah.
And then he changed careers, became a school teacher after I started working. And then my mom became a nurse, eventually got a master's in nursing.
Yeah.
And now they're both retired and they live in Montana. And they both can't help themselves. They do all sorts of wacky stuff. Like for a while, my mom was a school nurse for the school down there. My dad works in the library now and he has like a telescope and stuff. So,
Oh, cool.
but anyways, they made me love learning. So I think that's how I wound up in product and how I got to know you. Is
Yeah.
I love learning and you taught me all sorts of wacky stuff about product.
I did. That's true. I learned
And
some
it was
wacky stuff and then I pass it on. That's my that's my claim to fame. Awesome. Well, when I started thinking about people I wanted to talk to, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I think you're a person that, as long as I've known you, you've always been able to, um, you're close to you're self-reflective and you're close to your emotions. Like I can talk to you about like, hey, is this what's going on? And you can talk about it. Like you're not like, oh, I don't have any idea what emotion I'm feeling, um, which many men and lots of women are incapable of doing, right? So I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, this would be an interesting conversation. One of the things I always really admired about you when I worked with you is that you had pretty good boundaries about like, I have a home life, and these are people that I'm responsible for, and I have this work life, and these are the people I'm responsible for. So I'm curious, like, how have you acquired those boundaries? How did you get there? And were there times when it was harder and times when it was easier? And how has that looked across your career in terms of finding that balance?
yeah, yeah. So we probably met at the high point of me being good at that. Um, and I'm still staying up there. It's like, okay,
Good.
I'm not gonna switch that out for sure.
Yeah.
But it came from there are kind of two like key things. The first one was I went through a period where I was horrible about it.
Hmm.
And what happened was our management team, I just joined the management team like a year before for that job, and they came in with a consultant said everything's wrong. The doctors all hate you. The
Right.
the hospitals all hate you. You have to fix everything
Right.
tomorrow. And so they brought in consultants. They started like chipping. They're like, okay, you need a strategy. You need this and that and everything. And it was a really good experience. But for me, and ironically, this is ironically what drives it sometimes when you do it poorly. It's like, oh God, if we don't get this right, they're going to get rid of me.
Right.
That's like the unspoken fear. And it led to me like, yeah, working till midnight every night for like
Yeah.
months and months and months. And to her credit, it was my wife, Michelle, kind of was like, is this really what you want to be doing? Right.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The second thing was I have two daughters, right? And they were both born early.
Okay.
And everyone, I suspect everyone who has kids will tell you the first one is like a huge learning experience. Like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
There's a
Who got me
tiny
in charge
human.
of this other human? Right. Who said I could do this? Right.
Right. And to start with a little 4 pound tiny human who had to live in the hospital to start with,
Yeah.
I didn't think about how long it was going to take for everyone to recover. So I think I only took 3 weeks off after we got
Okay.
out of the hospital.
Okay.
And that did not go well.
No.
And for me, like
Yeah.
me personally,
Yeah.
I was a train wreck at work and then I was a train wreck at home,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so my second daughter, Scarlett, I tell her the story all the time. I said I learned from that. Like and she was born literally right after the over like working too hard thing because I was scared. So don't be scared, relax.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then obviously she's the second child, so she came second. So she was born, I took 6 weeks off.
Okay.
And I tell Scarlett the story that was one of my favorite times in my life ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can remember sitting in the backyard. Scarlett was asleep, Michelle was asleep, and Olivia was running around doing something. She's 3 years old. I took a minute to sit down and read, and we lived in this house at the time that had cherry trees in the back and apple trees in the neighbor's yard.
Yeah.
And there was this like moment, I can still see it in my head, where it was spring and the cherry tree blossoms just whipped by me in this courtyard.
Oh, wow.
And then the wind changed and the apple tree blossoms went by me.
Oh,
Three or
very
four
cool.
times.
Yeah.
And then I go inside and I see we had this bassinet and I see Olivia peeking in over the edge of the bassinet at Scarlett. You know, I say I can still remember stuff like that. So I think it boils down to like number one, the worst thing that could happen to you isn't like you lose a job because a bunch of consultants say doctors are angry, right?
Right.
You put that back in its place. And then number two, there's a reason I don't work I don't work to live.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't live to work. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I
Yeah.
work to live. I got it
Right.
backward.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I knew I was gonna correct you because I was like, I don't think that's what you mean.
It's early for me. Sorry.
It is early for you. Yeah. No, I think that's super fascinating, and I think it's interesting because I do think, especially in cultures like in the US where, you can just be walked out. You wake up one morning and a decision has been made, you didn't know it was coming, and that's the end of that. And we can live with such terror of like what will happen, right? And I'm not diminishing that people live on the edge, right? Like that many of us, and I've lived on the edge at times. I'm sure you have, like, people have lived on the edge and are like, if I don't have this job, we don't eat, we don't pay the bills, we don't have somewhere to live. Like, I understand that. But by and large, for most of us, there is always a solution, right? There is something we can do. There is something, we can ask someone for help. We can find other work. So even if it's a temporary solution, there's usually something we can do. And if we live in that space of just abject fear, we won't show up our best selves anyway,
Mhm.
right? And so the danger actually escalates instead of de-escalating, right? Because you're like, I'm so nervous it's going to happen, and so I'm coming in and I'm, maybe I'm cranky, or maybe I'm scared, or maybe I'm whatever, and it shows up in who we are and how we are, right? um so I think I really appreciate that, because I think of all the times, certainly in the early parts of my career, that I was like, the motivation was, I don't want to get fired. And the
Yeah.
truth was, I wasn't getting fired, right?
Yeah.
Right? But there was just
Well,
that, what will happen? I'm like, well, you'll figure it out. Something will happen, right? Um,
yeah. Well, there's something you said too, like there's something that like I should have asked for help.
yeah,
I should, my boss wasn't a jerk. I should have went
right.
to him and said, "Hey, I know everyone's working till midnight to prepare a capital budget that nobody's going to approve anyway. Can I put in like 4 or 5 items or ask somebody to like punch that in, later or whatever?"
Right, right,
Or the other thing is like, yeah, you don't get back the time you don't get there's sometime you don't get any time back.
right.
And so if you have to make a choice between what time to get back,
Yeah.
like don't make it out of fear, like you said.
I love that you just said that, because I'm thinking about a time when I did lose my job and I was out of work for, I don't know, kind of in the middle of my career. I was out of work for like, I don't know, 9 or 10 months. And it was getting close to the wire. I was like, well, I'm gonna lose this house, and I'm gonna have to find someone to live with, and I'm gonna have, like all these, and I may not be able to keep these pets. Like, there were things that I was like, what's gonna happen? And at the time, it was scary, right? And it was worrisome. But when I look back at my life, I don't. I don't like, there are things I can tell you, and there are things that when I look back at, I can feel in my body, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I remember how that felt. That it really left no scar tissue that I'm like, yes, I can feel it. And I'm not saying other people don't have that scenario, but I just think like there was something about, once I recovered from it, found a job, was able to pay my bills, didn't lose my house, didn't have those things happen. I was like, okay, this is going to be hard, but I can rebuild. right? And it was an uphill climb because I started a new job with nothing, right? And was like, okay, no, there's no buffer again, and how am I going to do, And so I remember it being hard, but I don't remember it like I don't think back to those years and think, oh, that was miserable and what will oh, it's all like my palms are sweaty thinking about it. Where I do have things that when I'm like, yeah, that makes my palms sweaty when I think about it, right? Like so I think there's so many things that in the moment feel so intensely overwhelming and burdensome that with some time and distance we'll go, yeah, that happened, right? And maybe for me, one of the things I always say about that moment was it was kind of a good humbler, right? Because I was flying high and thought that I couldn't be laid off, right? I was too important, right? Now I'm like, yeah, it can happen. And so I think it was and I remember telling my dad at the time after I got a job and started paying my bills again, was really, I never missed a bill. Like I managed to kind of eke it out by working a little here and there. And what I remember is that as time went on and I kind of didn't worry about money because of the kinds of roles I had. I remember telling my dad, I always am thrilled every month when I pay my bills, even still, because during that time every time it was so stressful. And
Yeah.
and now, even now, when I'm like, I pay my bills and I'm like, whew, another month done, right? And it was just this feeling of I wasn't, even when I'm not worried about it, I have this kind of memory that I lock into my body, right? That of being relieved every time. And so I just think when I think about that, when I think about that pressure for men and the pressure to provide, the pressure to be even if you're not the only provider or the sole provider, there is so much sort of defined pressure around men that they must provide, they must deliver, they cannot be without. And so I wonder, like, if some of that wasn't also at play in those
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, for sure. So especially I knew my dad's dad, and obviously very close with my dad.
Mhm.
They were both welders, both figured out how most important thing was to take care of their family,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
same, right? Um, and so seeing that, and dad, I think some of it came from like I talked about moving 13 times in 7 years.
Mhm.
It's because when you're a Boilermaker welder and you build power plants, when you're done building the power plant, that yeah.
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 Gotta go do
And
something else, right?
right. And mom and dad always made it work, but there
Yeah,
was always oh, okay, let's tighten the belt. Let's figure out what's next. We're probably moving, changing schools,
yeah,
but they always, I have to say they handled it really well. They didn't
yeah,
like pass on a lot of stress like some people I know. But I
mhm,
did see that as an expectation growing up, right?
yeah,
And it's not like my mom never worked.
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
dad did, and Michelle and I made a very similar decision. We said
yeah,
when we decided to have children, whoever's further along in their career will be and it just happened to be me.
yeah.
Now that's super comfortable after watching my dad and my grandma. But
Yeah,
you're totally right. There's a lot of expectations on, gender roles and
mhm,
that they're made up by society for
yeah,
better or for worse for
yeah,
some reason, right?
yeah,
And it does play a role. And I think it plays a role in health too. Like being
yeah,
willing to ask for help, go to the doctor. Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine. Right? Brushing things off
yeah,
versus,
yeah,
you know. But yeah, that played a huge role in it. Plus, I've not lost a job by being asked. I've never, I mean, it was Providence for 29 years, which is
yeah,
psychotic, right?
yeah. It's a
It's
long
crazy
time.
to be someplace
Yeah.
that long in 7 years.
It's totally. I remember when I met you and I was like, I'm sorry, how long have you been here? Right? Like, you were like, well, this long. I was like, that's crazy. It's a long time to
Yeah.
be anywhere. I'd never done anything that long, right?
Yeah.
Except have curly hair. That's the only thing I can think of. No, I 100%. Like, I think that there are these gender roles. There are these, these constructs, right? Right or not, right? And I do like I think what you brought up is really interesting. Like there is such a mm, I think it's still a stigma. That word feels strong, but I think there's still a stigma, or at least men have a perception of a stigma around saying, "Hey, I think I need to go to the doctor, or I need some help, or I need something going on with my body, and I need to figure out what and who can I talk to, right?" And um, so, I mean, you work in health tech.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not sure, you're a man and you work in health tech, so I guess you get to be an expert. What, what do you think drives that lack of um, taking that step?
Um, I do think there's a stigma. I contribute to it personally. Like I don't like taking Tylenol. When Michelle first met me, she'd be like, "You have to take some Tylenol." I'm like, "No, I don't want to take some."
Yeah.
And then
I'll just
and
be
then
in
she tried,
pain, thanks, right?
yeah, that's exactly it to some degree.
Right.
And also just I think this notion, I think I think it comes from a place of you can't rely on anyone.
Mm.
I
Hmm.
think that's the root cause of it. If you're relying on somebody, you're letting go of agency, and agency is like the holy grail for if you're
Yeah.
the breadwinner slash, slash whatever.
Yeah.
And there's also a little bit of don't tell me what to do,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
when I was young, I didn't enjoy it just because I like being simple. I like simplicity,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So if I don't want to buy Tylenol when I'm 20, like
Right.
I'll be
I don't need
fine.
this. Right.
Yeah, there's ice and stuff.
Yeah.
The older I get though, holy cow, you hit an age where for me it was like nothing, nothing, nothing all at once.
Yeah. You're like, and now I wake up like this, right?
Right, right. I
And
sneezed and
not in the influencer kind of way.
right,
In the
right.
I'm creaky and old kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
sneezed and know my back is
Like,
out.
ow, right?
Right.
Now I'm
Like,
gonna sit and
damn
look
it.
funny for the rest of the day. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
go ahead,
Sorry.
please.
No, I think that's a big part of it. And then I think it winds up I think it winds up just transferring over as
Yeah.
people get older.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
my
and I think
guess.
I was telling someone else we were talking about this, and I said, I think it's interesting for women as we think about this because while I will make all of my own healthcare decisions, I have a group of women that I talk to about all of this stuff, right? And so I like this week messaged my sister and said, "Hey, I don't think I'm eligible to do this until this time, but do you think I should pay to get it done? Do you think it's important?" And she was like, "Well, so we have this whole discussion, right?" And I have girlfriends that I'm like, and women, we go through pregnancy and menopause and all these things, and we tell each other, like, hey, I had this experience, you should be aware of that, or I went to this hospital, or I had this doctor. And I find it really fascinating that like all of the men I've talked to are like, of course I don't talk to men about this. Like, and I'm like, what? you you the other experts around you are not like you while you would reach out to them to talk about some things in business or sports or if I was building something, it's just not commonplace for men to be like, I need to ask someone about this, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. In my circle of friends, almost every single time we catch up about each other's family.
Yeah.
That's what we talk about.
Yeah.
Almost more than any, or it's what we're doing. Like, all
Yeah.
right, we got a board game. This is how this one works. Super fast,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I would say there's probably two other men in my life who I'll talk to stuff like that about.
Yeah.
But never, it's no, I think I agree with you. It's never like a common topic.
Right.
And
Right.
those other men I would consider, my probably the people I hang out with the close and are my best
Mhm.
friends, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, and I read something that said that, the majority of men spend time with other men in activity-based, scenarios. We play sports, we play games, we go to the bar, there's all these scenarios, and these are how men spend time together, and that's deep time. And women are like, yeah, we need a quiet restaurant because we need to talk, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, I gotta find somewhere where we can actually hear each other. I don't want to go somewhere loud when I'm with my girlfriends, right? And what? Like the men in my life are like, why do you need somewhere quiet? I'm like, because I have to be able to hear her. We're gonna talk about stuff, right? And I think it's just such a different viewpoint. And I wonder how often men just misinformation because they don't have anyone to share it with. Whereas I have this group of people, like I have a whole tribe of people that I can ask questions and I'm going to get 5 or 6 answers and then I can do whatever the hell I want.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah,
have information, right?
yeah. It's funny because the first time I ever saw a mental health counselor, mental health professional.
Yeah.
It was when I was struggling with that work challenge I
Mm-hmm.
was talking about
Mm-hmm.
before, right? And the person who I talked to who actually convinced me to do it was my dad.
Yeah.
He's like, I've been there, dude. Not dude. My dad never says dude.
He wouldn't
I've
call
been
you
there.
dude, but
Like,
yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
would be unlike my, if my dad ever saw this, he'd be like, what?
Didn't say dude, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
No, but he was like, yeah, I went through a period, and it was when he was transitioning roles where he was
Yeah.
really struggling,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, it was one of the best things I ever did was talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a huge opportunity for that. Like
Yeah.
that's an interesting thought. Like how could you make it uh, more how could you make it easier for men to feel comfortable to do that? Because I mean, it's the same, I suspect it's very similar to what you and your girlfriends do for each other, right? Except you do
Absolutely.
it as an expectation. I suspect you do it
It's
just
just
because
sort of
that's
an, how are you feeling? How is this going? I'm having this go on. Like it's very much like it's pretty, we kind of know where we each are in our life and we kind of know what could be happening. So we talk about it, right? Yeah. And I was just thinking as you were talking, like, I think what you just described is also potentially why so many of my clients are men. They
oh
can talk to me
yeah.
instead of having a man for a coach. Maybe if I have, I know my therapist is a woman and she has a lot of male clients too, that maybe if I'm gonna have this conversation, I at least want to have it with a woman. If I'm gonna be vulnerable, maybe there's a, because, and I always say, like, I think men seek me out, technical men seek me out as a coach because they know I've been successful and I'm a woman. So there's not this, they can say, they assume they're right that they can say most things to me and they're going to get a bit of a softer touch instead of a bro, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and and I wonder sometimes if that's not what's happening, right? But I don't know. I mean, ours is different because we work together, right? But I also think, like, so I have so many men for clients that, and I didn't expect to. Quite frankly, when I started coaching, I expected that I would be coaching women, and then I was like, okay, over half my clients are men, right? And I think that's why I sometimes am like, huh, I wonder why. But as I've had these conversations, I'm like, maybe it feels easier to
I
say I
bet
need
it
help.
does. I bet it does, but it's hard, because we know each other.
Yeah.
You'd have to run an A/B experiment
Yeah.
to find out. No, I mean it because you
Yeah.
were a good coach before you became a coach, in my
Yeah.
opinion,
Thanks.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm not buttering you up. That's just who a big part of who you were as a boss
Yeah.
on top of being a PM, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's it. But that's interesting. I think there is something to that because I'll tell you, I prefer women doctors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's only recently that when I go into a provider search, then I'm like, okay, if I have the choice, I'm gonna because they asked me, I actually had to sign up for a new PCP. I'm going at the end of the month. I'm super stoked about it
Yay.
because when I sneeze, my back gets hurt, right?
Right.
So it's like this will be helpful. And but I thought about it. I went through this. I had a parathyroid taken out, which
Okay.
is a gland kind of like your thyroid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like right here. So I used to tell people I got in bar fight, and that's why I have a scar on my.
Right.
It worked once, and then I
Yeah.
felt better. I never do it again.
Never mind.
But
Right. Yeah.
yeah, but to test that, you test parathyroid hormone level and you test calcium level, and I was never in the range where they would diagnose me.
Okay.
It was this I think she was a retired doctor who only practiced 2 days a week,
Okay.
looked at my entire history, ran a slightly different version of that test, and was like, you know what, you're a borderline case, but that's what's happening. You have hyperparathyroidism.
Interesting. Yeah.
And there's something too, like getting I think it was because I don't know what it was, but ever since then it's like I feel like there's more time taken in the conversations,
Mm. Yeah.
if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
when I'm having a procedure, I had a plantar's wart removed once. That was great because the guy's like, here's a knife. Right.
Hold on. Da, 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 da.
And I'm exaggerating. And it's not to say he couldn't be a very thoughtful doctor, and maybe he's
Totally.
found that.
Totally.
But I do prefer women doctors, and I wonder if
Yeah.
that's interesting.
It's
What else
interesting
plays
because
into that?
I mean, all the women I know, we all prefer women doctors as well. Often we're talking to women doctors about women's bodies, so that's our preference. But I current my NHS doc here in London, he's actually it's a man, and he is so no nonsense, and it just makes me laugh, right? Because he's just like, so we're gonna do this, and then you need to do this, and then I'm like, so last time I was in, I was like, are you giving me orders? I don't understand what is happening right now. I said, am I a patient or do I work for you? And he just laughed. He's like, oh, you're used to being the boss, are you? And I'm like, yeah. And he sort of laughed, but it and we're fine. Like it's a good relationship. But he's really the first male doctor I've had since I was a teenager, right? And I'm like, this is interesting, right? And it is a different demeanor, right? And it's not bagging on male doctors at all, like but I do think it is an interesting difference, right? And
Mhm.
potentially a different demeanor that shows up. So yeah. All right, let's shift gears. As your sort of final question, I would love to talk a little bit about what you've learned by being a girl dad. Whatever you feel comfortable telling me that they won't be like, Dad, you can't say that. Right?
So my brother has two sons, and they
Yeah.
came out and visited once. I don't know if I ever told you the story. And they're like, let's trade kids for a day, right? It'd be so cool. So we trade kids, right? And
Yeah.
I love those boys. They're amazing boys. They're fantastic. One of them reminds me so much of my brother. It's silly, right?
That's awesome.
And we both ended that night coming back to there like,
Everybody take your kids back, right?
yeah. And Jimmy's like, I don't think I know how to do this. And I'm like, I don't know how to talk to your sons because I say words and then I don't know what to do. So there is something like
Yeah.
boys and girls are different at a young age for sure.
Yeah.
And I came out of that thinking, okay, I was probably born to be a father of daughters because I don't know. Maybe if I had a son, it would
Yeah.
obviously, it would, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, it's interesting. I think some of the things around like women's health, obviously, I don't just turf that to Shell, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm I think I find compared to, men who only have boys that is something you learn a lot about because you
Right.
care about it
Right.
deeply, right?
Right.
And in our house, we're very like open about like what's going on in that
Yeah.
regard,
Yeah.
right? Even just like day by day, et cetera, et cetera. So you talk about I think me being able to like be close to my feelings, not be afraid to say I'm either happy, sad, pissed off,
Right.
or joy or whatever. Like that's a part of our household to a large
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say is they're like night and day, the two of them.
Yeah.
They're not the same in any way, shape,
Right.
in any way, shape, or form besides having their parents be the same
Right.
people.
They live in this house when they lived in that house, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like there are some very little things. Like I know that some men, like we were in Scotland, and there was this guy who wasn't from Scotland, but he refused to touch the pads that we were buying because Michelle needed pads when we were
Right.
there,
Right.
when we were checking out, right?
Yeah.
Like it
And
was really,
it's not gonna, you're gonna catch it, right?
yeah. Like what are you? Yeah. But like and I thought about it that day and I'm like, I don't care if one of the girls says they need something, I just go get
Right.
it.
Right.
And I know the differences between things
Right.
that probably some people don't. Now that's I mean, I'm probably dwelling way too much on that part of it.
No, but I mean, it is. I think it's. I think I may have told you that story that when I was in the CTO club, one of the CTOs said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I want to ask." I was the only woman. That's why. I'm so
Mhm.
glad you're here. I wanted to ask a question. Do you think we should have tampons in the bathrooms at the office? And I was like, and you could watch all the other men like, oh no. Like he waited until there was a girl in the room to ask this question, right? And I was like, yes. Like I'm,
Really?
uh-huh. And he and he was like, then he said, who should buy them? And I'm like, I mean, A, do you have an office manager? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, do you have a wife? And he's like, yes. I said, then you buy them. And he was like, well, I mean, and I was like, okay, I'm, we're done with this conversation. If buying them is the biggest problem, buy them on Amazon. Right? I was just like, I was like, I don't know why you don't know how to solve this problem. Like, it's very, very tricky.
It's
You can
just
buy it on Amazon and have it delivered to the office. No one will know. Like, it
I
was
think
so weird.
yeah. I think that's why I talk about that. It's like it's astonishing to me how few men understand some of those,
Yeah,
or even in their own, like most of them are married
yeah.
or know a woman, right? It's like,
You would think. Went to health class in high school? Something. There has to be something, you know.
yeah. So I think it's astonishing to me.
Yeah.
And I think that that is one of the things about growing up with, or helping the girls grow up, and like growing up all the time too, right? I don't know who I want to be when I grow up. Is it just I think if you had any of that sort of weird, like weirdness, I wouldn't have as close a connection to them,
Right.
you know, obviously. And how do you not like how do you not get, especially you go back to the first part of the conversation, your job is to take care of your family,
Yeah.
right? It turns out not all of them are men,
Right.
right?
Turns out
Yeah.
you live in a house full
So
of women. If you're not
yeah,
gonna pay
yeah.
attention, you have to walk around with earmuffs on all the time.
Right.
Sorry, I've got to put my headphones on so you guys don't talk about periods, right?
Right.
Okay. Then you better get bigger earphones, Dad, because we're talking about this. Just yeah. My dad was the same. There are five of us, three girls and two boys, and he could I mean, I always say I knew when I sent my dad to get supplies, he'd come back with like, "Here are what you asked for. Here's a chocolate bar. Here's some chips. Here's some
Right.
Midol." He knew
Right.
what he's like. I brought you a basically a care package, and I'm like,
Yes.
"You're the best dad in the world, right?" So it was a teenage girl's dream, right? So because he understood, like, do you mean get you a heating pad? Like he was that kind of dad, and I was just like, excellent. You know, like I mean, my sisters had raised him already by the time he got to me, so it was worked out really well. But it, like, like you said, like most men have women in their lives. All men had a mother at some point, right? And so, like, you know, it, and the same thing with women. Like, I think one of the reasons I want to have these conversations is that there are things that I'm like, I don't understand, right? Why is it like this, right? And so I think for me, a lot of this is about like, we need to have conversations about things,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So,
That's that might actually be my, you know how you talked about your group of women that you talk to stuff
yeah,
about?
yeah,
Especially now that the girls are adults,
mhm,
the conversations we have are great.
right,
They both work. They both have academic stuff.
yeah.
They both have like hobbies, and I'm like a collector of hobbies. And Olivia's like super into like number stations and monitoring them,
Oh,
which is
cool.
like spycraft stuff, right?
Yeah,
And so we
yeah,
talk about current events and stuff, and it's not like shallow
yeah.
conversations.
No, of course not. Of course
And then for Scarlett, you know, she loves going fishing with me. You know, we had goats and chickens and ducks and stuff. And Olivia's like, Olivia loves telling the story about how like somebody was surprised one day when she like was slinging around 50-pound bags of feed.
not.
Like, yeah, we just do this, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So a lot of it, but I think in some respects it's interesting because I know the joy through that of you being able to go to a restaurant with your girlfriends to
Yeah.
some degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I
because
think that's true.
yeah, they ask me questions and
Yeah.
they're not.
Well, and so it's like it's almost like being if in a home where your kids are girls, right? Have being a girl dad in this scenario, it's like you have a a sideline seat to what it is to be in those conversations among women, right? And I think it gives you a perspective that men who don't have that or who won't take advantage of it, because there are probably men who have daughters who are like, right, like, no thanks,
I
like,
never thought about that.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
you
never
have like
thought
you
absolutely.
have a front row seat to like what it must be like for women when they go to dinner and talk about these things because you're included in it, right? So, which is special for them as well, like to know men who will be part of that conversation instead of, you know, ooh, I don't want to be in this conversation. You know, it's like you'll be fine. You're gonna make it, right? It's fine. So, yeah, yeah, it's a super interesting. Well, thanks for talking about this with me. Like, I know it's, like it's been really fascinating to have these conversations. I'm excited about sharing these conversations because I do think that there's something for all of us to learn from different people's experiences. And I think that asking men to talk about what men think is actually like all of the men I've asked have been like, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, I don't know. How would I know? You know? but but it always comes naturally based on it's still your personal story, right? And so thanks for having the conversation with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. It's very RGB of you to have these conversations. No, it is. It is. The way she framed up some of her first cases were how they impact men to make sure that men would pay attention, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but that's
No,
what I
no,
thought
but
of.
it's my friend yesterday. We were talking about the election, and she was like, "This whole thing is not a women's issue only." She's like, "You people with
Mm.
sons don't. If you don't want them to be dads either, you need to think about this." And I was like, "It's a good point." So
Yep.
yeah, every
Yep.
issue it's a human issue, right? And that's for me, that's what like Movember and men's health and men's mental health, like all of these things, they are a human issue. And because if issues are impacting men, those have an impact on women. If men's mental health is in crisis, it impacts women, right? And so my big thing is men need to take care of themselves so that they stop killing themselves and us. And so, oh, I made balloons. I didn't know I could do that. But so that's the reason for this for me. Like it matters because it's a human issue. So,
Important work.
yeah. So, if you're watching this, there's a little QR code in the corner. You can give some money to Movember, which raises money and awareness for men's health issues like prostate cancer and testicular cancer, and men's mental health and kind of suicide prevention. So, if you would like to give some money during the month of November, there's how you can do it. Thank you, Billy, for coming and talking to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Leah.